All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Tan Leng Goh. I'm the current chair of the Shape America Research Council. And today I have the privilege to introduce our three newly inducted research fellows, Dr. Brian Dauenhauer, Dr. Scott McNamara, and Dr. Emi Tsuda. Each of them are going to take about 15 minutes to present their research to all of you. And then if there's time, we can entertain one or two questions. And then we'll take it from there. I just want to remind you all, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat as well. All right, so first up, we're going to have Dr. Emi Tsuda to present her research. So a quick introduction, Dr. Emi Tsuda is from West Virginia University, and her presentation is on content knowledge in physical education. So take it away, Dr. Tsuda.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today, and I hope you all are doing well. My name is Emi Tsuda, like Tan Leng just introduced me. So I'm assistant professor at WVU, and today I'm going to talk about content knowledge in physical education. So agenda today, I'm just going to briefly introduce myself, and then I'm going to talk about acknowledgement, my research line, and then what we know, what we don't know about content knowledge, and I'm going to also talk about future directions. So briefly, my background, I'm originally from Japan, so I would appreciate your patience with my English accent. But I came to Ohio State to complete my second master's degree and a PhD for physical education, teacher education. And I'm an assistant professor here at WVU since 2017. So before I start talking about my research, I just want to share my acknowledgement to my co-advisors who prepared me to be a scholar, Dr. Philip Ward and Dr. Jackie Goodway. And I also want to thank you for my collaborators who is always supporting me in the project. Okay, so I want to talk about my overarching research goal, which is to explore the ways to best prepare physical education teachers to deliver effective instruction to promote children's lifelong physical activity engagement and well-being. I know this is very broad, and specifically my primary research line is content knowledge. And I also do some projects in accountability policy and systems, and then also I look at cultural competence. But today I'm going to focus on my presentation about content knowledge. So I know many of you know what it is about, but also some of you may not know. So I want to start from, some kind of set a scene of what it is about. So I wanted to consider any type of movements well. Could be sports, physical activity, fitness. And are you confident teaching that to someone? And then now I want you to consider types of movements that you don't know really well, and how confident are you teaching it. So this is really the basic, the reason why we want to look at this, because as I can imagine, of course, if you know that content well, you're much more comfortable teaching, although you as a teacher, pedagogical knowledge is the same. So it's evident content knowledge matters. And when we talk about content knowledge conceptually, so this knowledge, notion of content knowledge started from pedagogical content knowledge proposed by Schumann 1986, 1987. So you can see the definition of this, but basically PCK is the knowledge the teachers use when they actually teach someone, in front of the children, what kind of knowledge they use, what knowledge they decided to adopt. So that's the pedagogical content knowledge. And although there are different ways to define pedagogical content knowledge, I'm using this framework, which is informed by Schumann, Rovegno, and Ward. So pedagogical content knowledge is informed by different areas of knowledge, such as content, student, context, curriculum, pedagogy. I think it's easy as a teacher, you can imagine how much knowledge you have to make a decision, how you deliver the instruction. And among these different areas of knowledge, the focus of my research is content knowledge. And within content knowledge in physical education, it's defined two subcategories. One is common content knowledge, and the other one is specialized content knowledge. So now, what those are? So common content knowledge is the type of knowledge anybody who performs sports or activity, anyone need to do that. So those include rules, safety, etiquette, techniques, and tactics. On the other hand, specialized content knowledge, this is unique to teaching. So specifically, those are tasks, task progressions, common student errors, and task presentation. So I wanted to think about, let's say, when you're playing tennis, of course, you need to know how to hit forehand. You need to know how to score the points to play game, right? So that's the common content knowledge. But when you're teaching forehand as a teacher, you also need to have a knowledge what progression of the task you provide to students. So first, I'm going to start from just working on bouncing up and down by themselves, and then they can move to the partner by using hula hoop, and then they can start from short distance to rally, and then they can now work on more critical elements specifically, and then they can move back to a little bit further distance. So when you teach the skills or tactics, there's always important progression to help learners. And then common student errors. So if you're teaching volleyball on a forearm pass, we know it's very common for students to bump ball like this. And if you know as a teacher, you can be proactive about the instruction, showing non-example when you're providing instruction, or you know when you provide feedback, that's something you can also look for to help children. So that's the specialized content knowledge. And previous research shows the importance of CCK and SCK, both of them, to deliver effective instruction. So specifically, the researcher you see here, Chang, Izarbid, and then Ward, Kim, Snell-Nicholm, you can see these scholars. So they executed intervention studies and tried to improve content knowledge among teachers. And they consistently found if they improve the content knowledge, the instructional effectiveness, such as appropriateness of task selections, maturity of task presentation, task adaptation, those are just examples. But this pedagogical effectiveness improved. And also in terms of CCK, SCK, it is also important to talk about how Shape America 2017 initial teacher standards identified this as one of the important elements to be teachers to acquired. So just overall, the importance of developing content knowledge among pre-service teachers is evident. And specific to my research, although there are other projects I conducted, I'm going to focus on these three areas. One is how much do pre-service teachers improve their content knowledge in content courses? And the second piece I'm going to talk about is my development procedure of valid and reliable assessments. And then the last piece is how much do pre-service teachers improve their content knowledge across PEAT programs? So I'm going to start from the first project I conducted. So this was published in JTP 2019. So what we look at was in one PEAT program, we try to intervene to improve pre-service teachers' specialized content knowledge, of course, as well as common content knowledge and performance. So that's the CCK focused group. And then as a comparison group, this was actually from basic instruction courses. I know it's a context is a little bit different, but also we know some of the PEAT program also only focus on the development of skill performance. So that's why we use this group as a comparison group. So you can see the sample size, it was not a huge sample size, but that was a really good first step to examine this area. So we look at 4 different sports content: tennis, badminton, volleyball, basketball. So we try to see the pre-test and then the post-test results and compare the improvement. So basically what the pre-test showed was what pre-service teachers acquired before they come into this specific content course in these content areas. and a post-test, obviously, after they took the class, how much they improved. What we looked at was, you can see on the bottom here, so we assessed teachers, pre-service teachers' common content knowledge with 10 more open-ended type of question items. And then SCK, specialized content knowledge, was assessed by content map, and performance was also assessed using the rubrics. I cannot explain the details of these assessments. I'm more happy to talk about it, after the presentation, or if you contact me, I'm happy to share, but that's what we did. And then this is the result. So if we look at CCK, you can see the BI is the CCK focused group, and then PEAT is more SCK focused group. And then blue is pre-test, orange is post-test. So you can see before they start the course, their performance is quite low, about 50% or lower. But after the post-test, after the content class intervention, you can see in some of the content, they were able to perform more than 80%, although badminton and tennis were still a little lower compared to other content areas. And then if we look at specialized content knowledge, so we use content map. So it takes some time to describe what it is, so I'm going to skip that right now, but we calculate index score to see how much they know if they pass this criterion score or not. As you can see in the pre-test, all content areas, their score was quite low. But then at the post-test, you can see the PEAT programs in all 4, they were able to improve more significantly compared to the basic instruction group. And then if we look at the performance, it's not surprising, but they were able to score consistently about 80% of the assessment. And when we look at if there's any relationships among these variables, if we were able to improve performance, can we improve specialized content knowledge? Can we improve CCK? We tried to look at it, but we didn't find any correlation. So overall, what we found from this data was improving one area of content knowledge, which includes CCK, SCK. We can also talk about performance. So those doesn't lead to improving other areas of content knowledge. So each area needs to be specifically taught. You cannot expect, because I talk about rules and then we talk about techniques and we improve performance, so now they should be able to teach. That's not the case. And then, but as we complete this project, we notice we have a reliable, valid SCK measure, but we are lacking CCK assessment because that was only content validated. So as a next step, what we did was CCK assessment development. So overall, 10 scholars, about 15 service teachers, and more than 1,000 pre-service teachers contribute to this project to develop CCK assessment. So in this project, we developed 7 secondary content and then 3 elementary content. And you can see the specific publication here. So this is the procedure we took to develop these assessments. Again, I'm just gonna, I don't have time to talk about details, but you can see the basic procedure here. And this is the results of data analysis. We use Rush, and overall, we successfully developed valid, reliable CCK assessments for 7 secondary, like I said, and 3 elementary content areas. So now these assessments are ready to go. So that helped us to further explore this area. So now as a next step, what we look at was how much do pre-service teachers improve their content knowledge across PEAT programs? In the first step, we look at how much they improve in the content class. But at the end of the day, as a teacher education programs, we want to make sure they are ready, they know the content when they graduate, right? So that's kind of the reason we try to see, as they go through the PEAT programs, how much actually they acquire the content knowledge. So you can see the method here. 6 and 5 PEAT programs participated in this study. You can see the number of participants for volleyball and tennis. These were the 2 content areas we looked at. And we collected the data of CCK for volleyball and tennis from sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So this is an overall data, and this is a median score. So you can see that entry is actually sophomore when they enter the PEAT programs. And then year 1 is sophomore when they complete the sophomore year of the study. And then year 2 is junior, and then year 3 and more, these are the senior students. So in both tennis and volleyball, you can see they score only about 40% of the CCK assessments. You may think, oh, maybe CCK assessment might be a little bit too difficult, but that's actually not the case, because we went through this validation process and we know, this is the knowledge area they need to perform. So this was a little surprising because we expect a little bit higher. So this was an important implication how much we need to work on in terms of content knowledge in the PEAT programs. So the conclusion of this study was pre-service teachers are far from meeting the criterion level of CCK in volleyball and tennis. We have to further explore different content areas. But overall, reconsidering how to teach content courses is essential. So the future direction is, so this line of inclusion, the pre-service teachers acquire minimal CCK when they enter and during the PEAT programs. So now we want to look at how about specialized content knowledge. And then also now it's time to intervene the content courses to actually find a strategy. Okay, how can we really make it work so pre-service teachers are ready to teach these content areas when they become teachers? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tsuda. We have a minute. So there's a question in the chat that asks, how did you get 1,000 pre-service teachers to participate?
Great question. So you also saw the number of scholars who are part of this project. There are 10 programs who helped this program. So each of us, there are some participants also, they took 2 different tests. Of course, we gave some time period so they don't get too much exposure to the assessment. But we basically had to reach out to different programs. So there may be some program who helped me with this project. Thank you if you are. But yeah, we approach different programs to get help.
Thank you, Dr. Tsuda. Thanks for presenting your research.
Yep.
Give you a round of applause. All right, next up, we'll have Dr. Brian Dauenhauer, who is now sharing his screen. Dr. Dauenhauer is from University of Northern Colorado, and today he's presenting on comprehensive school physical activity programming.
Thank you very much. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces on here. Thank you all for being here. My name is Brian Dauenhauer. I'm a professor at the University of Northern Colorado. I've been here for 11 years. I'm also director of the Active Schools Institute, which, as you can imagine, is very much aligned with my area of interest in school-based physical activity promotion and comprehensive school physical activity programming. So if you hear me say CISPAP, that's what I say. Some people say CSPAP and all sorts of different things, but that's what I'm referring to if I talk about that throughout the presentation. Just to start off, I'd like to acknowledge my mentors along the way. None of us get to where we are in our careers without really good people guiding us. Kim Graber at University of Illinois was the one who encouraged me to go on to grad school. Dolly Lambden and Xiaofan Keating at the University of Texas guided me through my master's and PhD. And then Russ Carson was a mentor at the University of Northern Colorado. He's now with Playcor. Also want to quickly acknowledge my awesome team at the UNC Active Schools Institute. These are the folks that I do a lot of collaboration with. I couldn't get the pictures of all my co-authors, but if you look at the screen, the gallery, there's a few of them on this call. You'll recognize their names when they pop up on some of the research that I'm going to share today. So thanks to all the people that I collaborate with. I love collaborating in research. That's the only way to do it, in my opinion. Okay, so the way that I'm going to frame this presentation, it's relatively short, so it's going to be very broad as opposed to deep. And this model that you're seeing on the right-hand side is a framework for an active school culture that includes 9 essential elements of an active school culture. This was just developed over the last 2 years and is available on the Active Schools website. And it basically outlines the research behind 9 essential elements. And you'll notice that if you're familiar with the 5 components of CISPAP, those are embedded within this model. They're there in the triangle in the middle and in the blue circle on the outside. But really what this framework does is it acknowledges some of those influencers on physical activity behavior on a broader scale from a socioecological standpoint. And so what was really fun for this presentation is I was able to go back to some of the research I've been conducting over my career and map it onto these 9 essential elements. And so that's how I'm going to take you through some of the research that I've been involved in over the years. Okay, so first of all, from a broad standpoint, just thinking about how we develop an active school culture and what it really is. You can see some samplings there of some articles that have been published, like in JOPERD, sort of overview articles, and then even a chapter in a book on public health that introduces physical activity promotion in schools. I'm going to share a little bit more detail about one study for each of these different elements, because that's pretty much all the time we have. So I'm going to share a little bit more about a systematic review that was conducted a couple years ago with 2 doc students, Anne and Peter. So this systematic review was looking at multi-component approaches to physical activity promotion and how effective they are in looking at health outcomes and academic outcomes. So you can see some of the search criteria that we looked at on the left side of the screen. And then on the right side is the outcomes, both sort of health outcomes and academic outcomes. We ended up with 32 studies reviewed in this systematic review. The most common is probably what you would expect, is a physical education intervention plus 1 additional CISPAP component, and we called that PE plus 1. And then as you go down the line, looking at physical education plus 2 additional components, PE plus 3 additional, or even studies that included all 5, the more components, the fewer studies were represented. So really what this tells us is there's not a lot of research about the full CISPAP model and all 5 components being studied. There were a couple studies that we found as well that did not have physical education as the foundation, and it was 2 or 3 components of CISPAP without PE. As you might imagine, we found that most studies targeted health outcomes, physical health in particular, and only a few of the studies looked at academic outcomes, which is an interesting area for future research in CISPAP. The main conclusion of the study was that multi-component CISPAP interventions are effective. So now on to the first component of an active school culture is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of the studies that I've conducted over the years with colleagues have been focused on unique populations, populations that have been historically underserved or marginalized. And so this includes things like Title I schools, low socioeconomic status families, and then urban schools in particular. And so the study that I'll share a little bit more about today is this study from a while back now, but the influence of physical education on physical activity levels of urban elementary school students. So this study was conducted in one urban elementary school in the South. And as you can see, it was primarily Hispanic and African-American students in grades 3 through 5. This was an observational study where the students wore pedometers. And in this particular school, there was 0 minutes of PE 3 days a week. There was 30 minutes of PE 1 day a week. And there was 60 minutes of PE another day a week. So really, we're looking at 2 days of physical education, one that had 30 minutes and one that had 60 minutes. And then the rest of the days, there were 0 minutes of PE. So in this particular population, we found that they were only getting half of the recommended steps per day. You're really looking at 12 to 15,000 steps per day in this particular age group. So they weren't anywhere close to where they needed to be, even on 60-minute physical education days. Students were more active on days where they went to school in comparison to weekend days. And they were more active on 60-minute PE days compared to your other days, which is probably not surprising to anyone on this call. One of the most unique findings from this study, though, was that we were interested in understanding if there was a compensation factor, meaning if kids had more PE time, would they then get less physical activity outside of PE? The answer to that question was actually the opposite. The days that kids had 60 minutes of physical education, they actually were more active and accumulated more steps outside of PE on those days where they had the most PE. So that's actually really encouraging for us physical educators to know that they're not going to just sit on their bottoms the rest of the day when they have more PE. They're actually going to keep moving, which is a great finding. Okay, now looking at the component of physical education, one of my interests is effective data use in physical education and how we use assessment data to drive our practice. So here are some samples of some studies that have been conducted over the years in that. I'm going to focus on a conceptual framework for tiered intervention, basically how we can use data to drive interventions and differentiate instruction for students. So I saw Bob on this call. He's an author on this paper as well. This is the framework. It's based on response to intervention. And the idea is that we use data to understand which students might be our higher performing students and how we can identify them and provide enrichment opportunities for them. And then also our students that might be struggling or be lower performing and how we can conduct and plan interventions for them to help them get back on track in terms of meeting our physical education standards. So this is the general model that's been proposed. Okay, physical activity during school. There's been a variety of studies that I've been involved with around this. Because my interest really is in data use, I'm going to share a little bit about this study in the middle on when we actually shared data with classroom teachers on how active their kids were during the school day and saw what happened afterwards. And so this was one school with 8 classroom teachers at the K-2 level. The students wore accelerometers and we did some systematic observation in the classroom. And the intervention is what you see on the right-hand side. We created data reports using the accelerometry data and showed the teachers how active their kids were, not just during their own class time, but if we added on these other opportunities like recess, physical education, and other special areas, and then the entire school day, and broke it down into sedentary, light, and moderate to vigorous physical activity. And we shared these reports with the teachers and then did sort of a post-test to see how active the kids were after the teachers got these reports. Teachers were very shocked at how much time their kids spent sitting. They really thought that they were moving more than they were, many hours sitting in the seats. And then after they got these data reports, we saw a small increase in MVPA during classroom time and a 9-minute decrease in sedentary time. So somewhat moderate outcomes here, but at least moving in the right direction. In terms of physical activity before and after the school day, I've written a book chapter on this and then also written a JOPR article as part of a special feature. And so I'll just talk a little bit about the JOPR article that just came out recently in the CISBAP special feature. And all this article does is it gives an overarching summary of the types of programs that you can do before and after the school day, and what the benefits are, what the research shows is effective. And that also brings into some considerations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really the table you see summarizes some of the resources that are available out there for before and after school physical activity programs. And it gives some tips, some of those tips and strategies for best practices around this. Okay, school and staff leadership. The research that I've been involved with, I saw Colin Webster on this call. He's an author on some of these, has been around administrators and principals in particular. The one that I'm going to focus on today was a scoping review that Colin Webster actually led that looked at what are the recommendations in the literature for how principals and administrators should promote health in their schools. And so this review ended up with 61 total articles that we looked at. And really the take-home message was there were 3 themes around what administrators should be doing to promote health in the schools. They should collaborate, they should advocate, and they should support. And you can see the different categories that go into those 3 main themes around recommendations. And then on the right side, you can see there were actually lots and lots of distinct recommendations of what administrators should do in order to promote health in their schools. And so this article kind of brought it all together and tried to synthesize that information. Okay, next component is planning, implementation, and evaluation. And so really, again, this goes back to the evaluation piece, how we use assessment and how we use data to drive planning and implementation, that ongoing cycle. And so I'll introduce really quick the CISPAP questionnaire. So this is a tool that was developed by Peter Stoker as part of his dissertation that looks at the 5 components of CISPAP and asks questions about best practices, the implementation of best practices for policies and practices. And this capitalized on existing school health surveys that were already out there, and then was posed to some experts to get feedback on the items and the validity and reliability. We used the test retest method with 38 PE teachers. And really the take-home message is that this CISPAP questionnaire is a valid and reliable tool for research purposes. We also have now revised it to be a needs assessment that's available to everyone on the Active Schools website. So if anyone wants to use it, it is now open. Policy and advocacy. So in this area, I've been involved in a couple studies looking at the Shape of the Nation report and how policies, state level policies in particular, have changed over the years. And so I'll focus on this study that Bob Knipe was an author on with Xiaofeng Keating and Peter Stoker, sort of looking at a 15-year retrospective on PE policies across the country. And what we found here is that the field is actually making some progress. The ones that you see highlighted there, standards, minute requirements at the elementary school level, and credit requirements at the high school level, those all increased in addition to assessment and fitness testing. So these are actual policies that are in place requiring these things. So from 2001 to 2016, there were significant improvements in states having policies associated with these. But everything else you see in the rest of the table, there were no statistically significant changes. And so really the take-home message of this is that while physical education has made advances in standards assessment and accountability, schools and districts and states have not followed along with really strong policies to ensure that kids are getting enough physical education. So like if you look at the weekly minutes, there was no change in how many minutes kids are getting PE, and even having substitutions and waivers, that those policies have not improved over the 15-year time period. Okay, last section is professional development and training, the last element. We've conducted a few studies here around how we get teachers to be able to implement CISPAP in schools. And so I'll focus on a 2-year study that was done looking at one-day professional development workshops. Basically, we were able to synthesize the literature around 4 characteristics of quality professional development, and then create an evaluation plan to look at these things being implemented when professional development workshops are being administered in the state. And basically what we found is that one-day workshops can actually have an impact on teacher knowledge, their implementation of practices, and their self-efficacy. But we also saw some mixed findings in terms of the actual ability of teachers to produce artifacts that can actually show how they've been implementing and the impact that they've been having. Okay, so I have to be honest, this was really fun to prepare this presentation to kind of map on some of the research that I've been involved with on these 9 essential components of an active school culture. You may have noticed the only area I have not done work on is family and community engagement. And I'm pretty psyched because we have a doc student now that's interested in this topic. So I'm hoping to do some more work here. All right, hopefully I stayed on my time.
Thank you, Dr. Dauenhauer. Yes, you are at time, but there is one question if you can address really quickly. They ask, any thoughts as to why the students got more PA outside of PE on days they had lessons with physical education?
Yes, I do have an idea on that. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. If you get kids moving, it just keeps going. It starts to become habitual, and that's what they do. So we just got to get them moving and they'll keep going.
It's a good response. Thank you, Dr. Dauenhauer. Let's give him a round of applause. And next up, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Scott McNamara from University of New Hampshire, and he's going to present his work on adapted PE.
Let me fix something real quick, and let's do that. All right, hold on. Try that one more time. Thank you very much for having me. I am very honored to be here and very excited about the opportunity to present to you all today, and excited to be a member. And since everyone has acknowledged their awesome mentors and such, I thought I would mention some of mine. I am in the adapted physical education realm, and so my mentors have been Dr. Susanna Dillon at Texas Women's University. One of my really good friends and co-authors and mentors is Justin Hagel at Old Dominion University. And I thought I'd throw in a general Pete person. So the person I've been working with the most probably is Kevin Richards. So those are all awesome people that I get to work with all the time, and very excited to be in this field. So going into this, so I went about this, I want to present a little bit about adaptive physical education. I did a descriptive study that I recently did. So this is actually not published yet, this data that I'm going to provide you. And I thought I'd try to get a little short and sweet into the intro about adaptive physical education. So hopefully some of this right here is review. So special education includes adaptive physical education and physical education, and that is my primary research focus. And what I'm mostly focused in on is around adaptive physical education broadly. So my areas of interest, I do span quite a bit in that area, but I often look at educational leadership and their relationship with adaptive physical education, online learning experiences in adaptive physical education, and then knowledge translation attempts, and how do we disseminate the information about how do we get the information out to different groups about what is adaptive physical education. I often have a crossover in those, and all of that to me is trying to disseminate strategies to promote knowledge and attitudes among key stakeholders related to adaptive physical education. So the one that is paramount to me is school administrators, as they do not have a lot of studies around that. So just quickly, these things that I often look at is how do we use different online tools such as social media and podcasts to change and inform different APE related information. And then I've been doing a lot on educational leadership, so school administrators who are big power structure stakeholders and allocate our resources and funding often around physical education and adaptive physical education. And the one I'm going to focus in on today is kind of knowledge translation, adaptive physical education, but kind of just generally around what are different people's views of adaptive physical education for children with disabilities and such. So I was going to focus in on a study again that I just recently completed, and I'll probably be presenting this again in a more nuanced fashion at SHAPE. And so I thought I would kind of like show two studies that we did that kind of highlight some of my recent work around some of these areas. So this is status and perspectives of APE in New England, which is where I reside. So we did a we did a study. There's a team where we worked with some disability studies advocates, and we also worked with some research methodologists. So what we did is we want to understand the ecology around physical education and adaptive physical education, because what we find is that often what brings the adaptive physical education services availability is not always the children's needs, rather it's the parents, teachers, administrators that create this other kind of gatekeeping ecology around that. And so those people, as we probably know, create really important settings and tones for how APE and PE are valued and prioritized, the allocation of services and resources for those services. And however, there's really been not a ton of research on some of these groups, and then also the intertwining of these groups. So there has been a decent amount on general physical educators, a little bit on parents, very little on school administrators. But again, I think what's been missing is that we're not understanding that there's an intersection and intertwining of relationships, of negotiations between each of these groups to understand the ecology of why these services are often not being provided at all or effectively. So my research team and I recently conducted 2 studies. We did a survey study and we also did an interview study. And so we interviewed all 3 of these groups to understand their perspectives, values, and awareness. And just real quickly, because I took out a lot of slides because I wanted it to be as concise as possible. We'll get into some of these, but this was conducted over like a year process and such. And again, this has not even hit the peer review process, so you all are the first seeing this. So initially what we did in the area, we did 60 parents, 80 physical educators, and 25 school administrators. And we developed a survey to understand the availability of adapted physical education and their perceptions towards its importance, and also the degree to which they thought there was quality occurring. These are some of the general findings that we have. And some of those include, which we found to be interesting, is the amount of people stating that they had APE being provided. So parents, which is okay, was about 50%. But then what was surprising to me, because really adapted physical education, almost every physical educator should be have a student who's receiving it, as well as school administrators should. If we look at the number of students that would qualify for it, every school should be providing it. So every school administrator should have somebody on that. And also how many people have it documented. So if adaptive physical education is being provided, it should be documented on a child's IEP. Otherwise, it's incompliant with the law. And so these, even though some of these might be a little higher on those are still a little shocking. Also over here, it doesn't seem to be, at least from these surveys, showing that there's an issue with an importance. Generally, these people and stakeholders are saying that they do see these things as quite important, although interestingly, the physical educators were actually the least enthusiastic about that. However, we do find a lot more discrepancies when it's about the quality of those services being provided, which is seen in these 2 areas. So we ran several chi-square analyses with this, and not to get into all the p-values and such, but these were our main findings. So we looked at it between groups, and we also looked at whether or not they indicated they had adaptive physical education provided in their schools or to their child. And generally what we found is that parents who who disagreed about the statement about receiving quality PE services were significantly higher than other groups. So the parents were much more likely to say that their child was not receiving quality PE services for their child. And then schools that with APE services were much more likely to agree that they felt like their child was getting quality PE services. And then those as well who were in schools with APE services significantly agreed more that the degree to which their child's students' PE service teachers were more prepared. So this is showing us that when APE is being provided, pretty much all parties are feeling more prepared, and that there are higher quality services being provided, as well as it highlights that parents might not feel that their child's always getting good services when PE teachers and administrators do think so. So that's just, an again, broad kind of view of that work. And then looking at our second study, we did a follow-up study with those same participants. We took a purposive sample where we again looked at that ecology. We looked at physical educators, parents, and administrators. And we did a qualitative study rooted within a critical ableist perspective through an interpretive lens. I know, lots of words. And we employed a reflective thematic analysis and did a bunch of things, engaged in some rigor. So we did reflexive notes, used a critical friend, so on and so forth, highlighting again the survey and qualitative work that I do. And so with this process, we identified 4 kind of intersecting, or we constructed 4 intersecting patterns and themes around these. And I thought I would just briefly go through some of these to kind of highlight some of the findings that we had. And again, we did use an ableist perspective, which ableism is around the idea that there are structural barriers and discriminators against people with disabilities. So one of them, disability is something that we should ignore, as we do not want them to feel bad. That was something that came through quite strongly. And so these are quotes from some of the different participants. But basically, this is like, one of them is sometimes it can feel patronizing. This is how people often speak down to people with disabilities. They say that sing-song voice, so talking to them like they're a child. One of my favorites is from a PE teacher who said, "We've been lucky, we've never had a deaf child, who never had a blind child as well." And then another one is, I think the teachers care about the disabled students as they're nice teachers, but I don't think they value them as valuable members of the school. They don't have high expectations for them. Other things that came in this one was literally trying to not talk about disability. They never wanted other students to acknowledge disability. Some students, PE teachers bragged, quote unquote, bragged or discussed about not looking at IEPs and because they didn't want to acknowledge the disability because, however, a lot of people feel that disability is an identity. So ignoring it can deny someone their identity, as well as IEPs are structured to individualize and accommodate people so they can be successful. So again, not being with those can be patronizing and potentially harmful. So who cares about APE? It's just for disabled kiddos. And so this goes into showing that the value of adaptive physical education in turn is the value of disabled children and their and health and physical activity preferences and needs. So again, and I'll just read like one of these. This is from an administrator. To be honest, I don't know anything about PE, so I have no expertise to offer them, or I don't have a lot to contribute. I sort of let them do what they think is best and let them have at it. One of the teachers as well talked about going to the school board trying to promote adaptive physical education while they were trying to cut it as well, and had a fight for his job and feeling again really undervalued, but also that disabled children are being kind of pushed to the side in that. So presence as inclusion and unintentional marginalization in PE. And so this was also showing us that often that people conveyed that the meaning of physical education for children with disabilities was quote unquote participation, as in just kind of being there and also being around their peers, non-disabled peers was the main value. So rather than other attainment of different aspects of the curriculum, it was all about kind of those two aspects, or the quote unquote inclusion concept, where it just means being around others without disabilities. For example, someone pulled her out of the school because of the lack of quote unquote inclusion. I can discuss that quote unquote if you like at the end. And then this was really interesting. So these two parents were talking about the idea of unified PE, partner PE, where we have children with and without disabilities in the same class, where the children without disabilities are kind of mentoring or being a peer partner. Very interesting because that's growing as a way to as an adaptive physical education service model. It should not replace adaptive physical education, but what was really interesting on there too is that they were mentioning that these that basically, as you can see, they're standing off on the side on their phones. One of them discussed that the peers only wanted to be there so they could add it to their resumes, and again, kind of pushing towards marginalization and patronization of disabled children. PE is a nightmare. That's a quote that we got, and and these are traumatic. A few parents in particular had traumatic experience that they provided in here. So like one is she would start to cry. She stopped talking about it, and she would go to the choir concert at the gym. She wouldn't go to the dances in the gym. She'd sit outside the gym. She didn't say anything. She behaved differently, and she still is hesitant to go into a gym. Another parent, when I see duck, duck, goose written down, I really question what the level of qualification of teaching the classes. Do they know anything about autism? Do they know anything about someone who might be in a wheelchair or different physical disabilities, as well as emotional or neurological disabilities? And so these were highlighting, which has really been sadly well established in the literature, is that children with disabilities, disabled children, in PE, it seems exceptionally, are having really, really poor experiences. And as we know, that's going to lead to, negative views towards physical activity and negative trends in physical activity, often in potentially because their body is putting in display, and because physical educators often have a perfect ideal of what the body should look like and what health and fitness are, and such. So some implications is that, we often lack knowledge and value towards APE, or all these stakeholders seem to, and thus also contributing to a lack of value, at least towards health and physical activity of disabled students. And then again, if you have adapted physical education, you are more likely to value it. And we saw this in the interviews as well. It's kind of a haves and have-nots. Those who have it seem to value it, seem to have, especially when it's in the IEPs and people are doing the effective things and they have proper training, the value is higher, and what they're expressing often seems to be much more to the advantage of the disabled children. And then often PE services for disabled kids is often underwhelming, if not harmful. And there's another study by Hagel and Marr about a year ago where they interviewed autistic children, and they found that children from their PE experience expressed suicidal thoughts from their really poor experiences. So and then we want better services. We need to educate. We need to advocate for our services, just like I'm doing hopefully here right now. So thank you for staying with me. We need to basically provide this knowledge to different groups and such. And that's, I think, again, we have this complex ecology around the access to these services, because each one of those, the parents, teachers, and administrators have unique but interrelated relationships with one another. And that's something that we need to continue to understand, is how those relationships are having and what are the patterns that are emerging from different groups. Last but not least, I just got funded for a master's program for adapted physical education. So I am recruiting now, starting next semester, and I'm going to be bringing 35 fully funded adapted physical education master students to UNH over the next 5 years. So there's a QR code to the website, and would love for you to share that widely. And I just found out like 2 weeks ago, so I am doing my best. That's it.
Let's give a round of applause to Dr. McNamara. Thank you for your presentation on adapted physical education. There's one question. If you can quickly address, how can Shape America play a bigger role in APE advocacy?
Yeah. First off, I would like to say, being here is part of it. I think that there is I would say that when I came up in my PhD, which wasn't too long ago, I think I finished in 2018. I did finish in 2018. And there was a lot more feelings that we were often pushed aside in the general PEAT conversations, as well as in Shape America. And especially probably at the beginning of my PhD programs, those were really prevalent views in the APE kind of world. I feel like that's actually changing quite rapidly, as we have people that are PE researchers often coming into the APE world, as well as, I would just say, like Audra Waters is somebody that I've worked with, because I'm the chair I'm the past chair now for the APE SIG. There's been a lot of really strong movement and shape around APE that we've been really excited about over the last few years, that we maybe didn't feel as a community maybe as much in the years before that. However, I do think that there's a few things. I think communicating with us on a regular basis, identifying leaders, I would love to have a shape or official relationship with SHAPE and like NCPED, which is our national consortium for physical education for individuals with disabilities. And I think more ways to kind of to have those. One last thing, and this does come up even in like my research, which is, often we think we're doing good by children with disabilities or disabled children, because again, like we see them flapping around in the gymnasium and we're like, oh, they're being acted, whatever, but their bodies are being on display in a unique fashion and such. And they're, PE is a much more dynamic setting than many other contexts. So with that, I would just be really, really I would advocate that SHAPE also talks to us about quality control, about what we disseminate around adapted physical education. Because I think, and it's not just a SHAPE thing, but often sometimes the things we see disseminated maybe aren't always the best practices.
Awesome. Thank you for your wonderful response. We probably have about 2 to 3 minutes left. I just put a question in the chat that was sent to us when a registrant registered for this webinar. Any of the presenters, feel free to unmute and respond to the question. The question is, are there research-based pros and cons for elementary PE class schedules? For example, which is better, 1 PE class each week all year versus 3 PE classes 1 week, then no PE for 2 weeks?
Yeah, so I can address that question. The study that I shared at the beginning of my presentation on the 0, 30, and 60-minute approach, we don't necessarily know exactly how many days is the ideal, but I think the results of that study at least showed that having PE 2 days a week does not do what we need it to do. We need to have it more than 2 days a week. And ideally, even the 60-minute mark didn't get us there. So I think that also speaks that in addition to physical education, we have to be looking at other opportunities for physical activity outside of that as well.
That's great. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. In what ways other than this webinar do you disseminate your research in ways that teach practitioners both in form and medium? Maybe any one of you can respond to this question.
I think it's always a challenge to, connect the gap between the research and the practice for sure. And, what I try to do, I can do a lot more. But, I think presenting at the state conference is one, because that's the conference, the more teachers go, which the teachers go more than, national level conference. And then also, Jeopardy paper is also a good way, because I sometimes get an email, when I publish, they kind of ask some questions because they want to use it. So I think that's also one way I'm doing it. And, talking to the teachers around, where our programs are located, that's also kind of one way to do. But I'm also would love to hear different, approaches.
Awesome. Thank you for your response. I think we're at time, and Dr. Dauenhauer also posted something in the chat, so be sure to read that. I just want to say a huge thank you to our 3 presenters today, our newly inducted research fellows, for presenting their work today. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to spend with us this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And I'm going to put my email address in the chat. I hope you have a wonderful session. And if you have any topics you'd like our Research Council to host in the future in terms of Shape America webinar, feel free to send me an email. So thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Bye.